Dr. Watley, what in the world is going on?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Jakes, first for the opportunity to join you and these other distinguished brethren and specialists at this time together. Let me approach your question first from being a baby boomer. And whenever I hear that term, it chuckles me because it's this point in my life, it's strange to hear me referred to as a baby anything. But when I was 7 years old, I was Brown versus Topeka passed. I was the first generation to attend integrated schools. The journey from there to here has left me with both frustration and hope. The frustration is the fact that after a Black president and after all this time, we're still in a fight that Black lives matter. And the hope is to see a new generation take up the struggle that has defined my own life. To see another generation have defining moments in the liberation struggle means that they will have a lifelong commitment to that cause. The frustration is that we are still in some ways where we were when I was a child. What I have to struggle with is not allowing my frustration to spill over into my grandchildren, to make sure that their world will be different.
On the other end of that baby boomer spectrum, I've got Michael. What's going on, Michael?
So that was incredibly deep, Pastor William. And it made me think about how you talked about in your generation having had defining moments. And I think one of the things that I've been most reflective upon is that for my generation, not only is this social uprising a defining moment, but the pandemic is a defining moment. This economy is a defining moment. Trump is a defining moment. We literally are being birthed into the world in such a time of collective chaos across the boards that I think it's caused a deep time of reflection, both individually and as a collective, that has caused us to reevaluate our value systems. Maybe back in previous generations, you may have had a more narrow perspective of a particular fight. You might have had in the civil rights movement, focusing on getting the right to vote, focusing on ending segregation. And now, having reaped the benefits of the work that the generations past have done, we are coming up in my generation where we are able to have the privilege to look at all different forms of pain. You mentioned the patriarchy. We have the opportunity to look at how Black men are continually perpetuating that particular form of causing pain. We have the ability to look at how our economy is structured and how that is causing certain people to be able to rise to the top during this pandemic while other people are being cast further to the bottom. And so I think for my generation, it's deeper than a one issue focus at this time. It's causing us to look into ourselves and answer how in any way, shape, or form am I contributing to the pain of others in my society? And I think that's incredibly unique because it'll allow us to grow up more holistically caring for individuals, not only for ourselves, but for the people who we are able to project our pain onto. And I'm incredibly excited about that because I think it's something to be hopeful about, that the fact that we were birthed into the world in this time of chaos will give us a unique experience with pain and therefore make us more willing to atone for it.
Birthed into pain, and you just called yourself a baby boomer. And now we've got another birthing going on. My God. Roy, you've got little people at home, well, young adults. What are you pivoting on right now?
For me, with the pandemic hitting, with the Black Lives Matter movement, I have to define who I am as a man in front of my household first before anyone else. And so what's been interesting with the pandemic is I have not been able to intellectually take a look and say, this is what we should do. The science is all over the place on it. And I never realized how much my family looked at. I can look at myself as the leader of faith in my household or as the leader of intellect. But I never realized how much stability trumps all of that and how much my decisions can't constantly change on what I think, on what I have to be careful about how I express myself in my own household because they're looking to me for stability. They're not looking to me for all the answers, but just to provide a stable element within our house. And so with all this happening all at once and during this season, it's been real interesting. As I work at the Potter's House, so I'm a white guy who works in a predominantly Black community. And so to paraphrase very loosely, the scripture that has come to mind and kind of been our mantra in this household is that if one suffers, we all suffer. If one triumph, we all triumph. And so to make sure that we don't ignore what's going on, whether it's mask, I personally wear a mask not because I lack faith or not because I'm in fear, but it's the least I can do to be hospitable to another human being.
So good.
And so, yeah, and then even with what's going on in the Black community, I've made sure and injected that into my household and say, where do we stand on this? How do we process this information? Because while it's a social thing, but it's also a thing within the community of faith. These are our brothers and sisters that are going, once a year we do it's called, we call it Pesach, it's called Passover. And in Passover, one of the rules in the Jewish community is you have to put yourself in the Jewish people's time and frame of mind when they were going through this. In other words, you have to inject yourself in that community. You have to believe that it happened to you. And so I've taken that same thing and said, okay, with what's going on with the Black community, we're not Black, but this is happening to us. This is our family. And so just for me, it's just to make sure that we triumph together and we lose together. And maybe somehow spiritually, by doing that, the heaviness of what we're all going through gets distributed amongst us evenly.
Anthony, you travel all over the world, and all of a sudden, all of that's come to an abrupt halt. What's going on in your mind?
What a loaded question that is, and it's something I've been forced to consider because, like you said, since March, really, there has not been a plane that I've been on. And I've spent the last 10 or 15 years of my life flying the majority of the month out to serve people. I love people, and I love touching people. But the last few months of this pandemic, and particularly all that we've seen in social unrest in our country, has done some deep affecting of what you see. You know, you want to believe in the decency and the beauty of the human spirit, and that's what I've always been taught. It's what my father taught me. My dad is a pastor. My grandfather was the bishop. My dad is the bishop. So I've grown up in a line of just knowing the word, understanding the word, studying the word, and living my life by it. And then, like Michael said, we're living in a time where it's like at a crossroads of everything going crazy at the same time. And I kind of found myself, as I was listening to the other panelists, in a position where I'm trying to get to where Dr. Watley's going. I've been where Michael is, and it's vulnerable. It is a vulnerable place to be, to want to know from Dr. Watley's generation, does this feel anything like what you all have experienced that I've heard my grandparents start? Is it similar? Is it the same? Will the same tactics work? What do we need to do? How do we mobilize? Who is Martin Luther King for us? What do we do? Is it me? Should I do something? You have those feelings going on. And then for the Michaels in my life, I'm trying to figure out, how do I stand up? What do I be? How do I create myself as an example? What do I do to take some of the burden off of the generation that's coming that seems fearless? And then I find out from Dr. Waller's generation of what I should be afraid of. What do I do? It is the most vulnerable position that I've ever found myself in. And it's like a forced stillness. You know, this entire year has been like a forced, everybody sit down, be quiet, and open your eyes. And that's what I feel. That's what I feel like is happening. It is intentional. I believe that everything God does is intentional. I feel like we have all been intentionally sent to the principal's office. And now we're watching the video of what generations of learned behavior, what the result is. This is all learned. This has been instilled. And I heard Roy talking about having family conversations with his children and how that affects who you become. And the things that I'm seeing are the results, in my opinion, of learned behavior. Somebody has taken the time, whether it was intentional or whether kids were watching in the corners while you were having what you thought were private conversations. All of it has come to head. And for me, it is alarming. To be honest, it is frightening. And, you started the conversation asking about what you wanted the women in our lives and our sisters and our moms to know is that, for me I'm a Gen Xer, Dr. Wiley. You're a baby boomer. I'm the end of the Gen X generation, and I don't have the answers, and that's scary. For me, in my circle, I am looked on to be a rock. I'm looked on to be a source of information. I'm looked on to lead. It's a natural thing inside our believe in every man that there's something inherent about us leading. And right now, I don't know where to lead anybody. I feel like we are literally at the edge of the Red Sea, like Moses, with a bunch of people behind us saying, what do we do? And I don't have a clue.
Dr. Natasha, what's the counseling schedule been like for you?
It's amazing. I think during this time where everybody is chaotic, they're looking for a safe place to land. So counseling, we just got a report the other day from my assistant that we have increased our volume by 30% over the last month. That's just in the last month. People are calling and wanting answers. They're wanting a safe place. They want reassurance to know everything is going to be okay. So it reminds me of the saying of the author Charles Dickens. It's the worst of times, but the best of times, all at the same time, and learning how to cope with that and how to be okay with having joy in the season, but also experiencing sadness in this season. And so I think people are reaching out to talk to a professional to get coaching and to get encouragement. And I love what he said about the stability. I think that's what everybody is looking for, not necessarily the answer, but they're looking for stability.
Ricky, do you find counseling that men find that a plea for help or a sign of weakness?
I think initially most men, with where we've come from, we look at it as a sign of weakness, as a sign that you've not been able to handle your business, manage your household effectively, because we were raised by men who took pride in that and never showed a crack of weakness. So now what's very difficult for our generation, because I'm part of the generation that started considering therapy as an option to help you walk through life. So now what we're realizing that we're redefining this and saying this is strength instead of a weakness, because vulnerability enables you to assess everything that's going on the inside of you. Because if we really want to connect with the women in our lives and everything around us, and to be able to be effective in leading and supporting and providing that stable foundation for our families, we need to be able to go and talk to somebody and just explore our options, explore life and other ways of doing it, because we all respond to life and situations based on our biased perspective. And we're learning that counseling helps you get a light on the different biases and to how effective we manage things. So I think there's a transition in perspective as far as therapy goes.
That's so important. You know, at first, allegedly, they were saying that young people thought that they were exempt from the disease. But how does your generation feel when you at one time felt so invincible, but then you found out that you were going to be affected, not necessarily, but in addition to, you were going to be affected by the illness, but then the other sicknesses that are coming along with that illness? It seems like all of the plagues have just come upon us at once, which is very, very biblical. Michael, Anthony, Roy, what changes did you find that you had to make that were kind of difficult because it's not your way of life? You're always out and playing basketball and singing and hanging out. What changes did you have to make appear?
I could speak to that first because it really hit me, Mrs. Jakes, when you talked about feeling invincible. Because when the pandemic came around, I was studying abroad in my last semester. And we had kind of heard news about what was going on with something called COVID. And we didn't really know a lot about it back then. We still thought it was just going to be the cold. And so we were just like, I caught the cold before, forget it. And so our leaders were telling us, no, this is serious, guys. You might get sent home. And we're just not listening at all. We're making videos, laughing about it. Oh, we're still going to just have a great time. And then to immediately have the hammer come down, and then they say, boom, you're getting sent home. And then a second hammer to come down that oh, you might not even have a commencement. You might not get to graduate with your friends. And you might have to just go, your college experience has just been cut short. It was a massive amount of cognitive dissonance to go about your life feeling like you're actually in control, and then so quickly and violently be forced out of control, but not only out of control, but then forced into isolation, to go back to your homes. And for a lot of people, that even then being forced into an unstable environment, if your home life is not incredibly stable in college or whatever your job was a refuge for you. I think it was incredibly humbling, and something that you don't often experience in your youth if you're kind of just living free. And so I think for me, what it forced me to do, and I think what it forced all of us to do, is realize how much you have to rely on others, how non-self-reliant you can be, and also making us more hyper-aware of our surroundings. And because now you're forced into a situation that you can empathize with your entire class about, your entire generation about. And it opens your eyes to the fact that you were living this narrow pathway where you were really only kind of worried about what was going on in Michael's world or whoever's world. And now that's kind of been violently shattered. And it's hard. And so I think it's kind of about being forced into premature growth, which I think we've all been talking about. But I think it was incredibly beneficial because it forces you to go back to the root of the lived experience, which is A, relationships. B, for me, it was my faith. It incredibly challenged my faith in terms of, how I believe God to show up in the world, how I believe him to show up in my life, to have those good experiences taken away from me, and kind of forces you to get back into the real nitty gritty of what it means to kind of live this thing out. And I think that's something that our generation doesn't often have to face so early. So to have to face it that early, I think was difficult, but again, I think it's forced some premature growth for us.
I couple with what Michael said. It's tough. Tough. It seems like such a small word in comparison to what it really feels like. I get to work at and serve at one of the greatest churches in the DMV area, the First Baptist Church of Glen with Pastor Jenkins and First Lady Trina, and our church serves 20,000 people in our community. And the first thing that the pandemic did was shut all that down, So there is no sense of community and coming together in that regard, which I didn't realize how much of a big part of my life that was until it was gone. It doesn't mean that we don't still have church. We are the church. So literally, it's a shining moment for the Christian community, because now when we were catering to just those inside of the building, we now cater to the entire world via Facebook and Instagram and Zoom and what have you, which is the great call. So I'm excited about that, but I miss the coming together part quite a bit. So that's been a challenge. And I think my other biggest challenge, if I can pinpoint something, would be redefining. I like the word you use, Michael, redefining. It's been redefining love right now for me, because I don't live with my parents, because I live on my own, because I'm not with my family all the time. How do you tell somebody that I love you so much that I have to stay away? That's tough for people who are community-based, for people who are here. You know what I mean? I'm a hugger. I'm a get over here, I love you type of person. And so that's been challenging. I was telling Dr. Wiley before we started, like, I've seen my dad twice since March. Now, I've seen him on Zoom. He's a rock for me. And I depend on him and my mom, and I depend on being around them or what have you. But my dad is taking the pandemic very seriously, as we all are. I have people in my life and in my circle who have been sick and God has healed them. I have people who have transitioned as a result of COVID. It is not a game. It's very, very serious. It's sobering. And so redefining love for me has been like, as much as I want to do this, I need to do this to protect not just me, but to protect you. And that has been a challenge for me. So especially with my mama now, any son with their mamas, man, it's like, what do you mean? You know what I mean? Something goes crazy, something goes wrong with the world. Things are always good when you get to mom. But even seeing my mom from a porch and having to wave at my mama, my grandparents who just celebrated their 80th and 81st birthday last month, doing a drive-by parade to love on them as opposed to being able to hug them and embrace them, that is challenging for me. And in times where people, in my life, I can't speak for anybody else, but in my life, I've seen more personal death in my circle in the last 4 months than in my entire life. My God. It's become more normal than I'm okay with, if I can be honest. I'm not. My God. I don't even know. I want to say that it's, I want to say that I'm numb, because I don't know if I've had a chance yet to feel. I probably need to come and sit on one of these 2 couches I see up here and figure that part out. I am an advocate for counseling, by the way. I believe in it. I believe in therapy, and I believe in counseling. And there is like some long-standing issues, I think, that will come from this that will need to be addressed, both on a spiritual level, but also on a social level, on a psychological level, and on an emotional level, because people are just dropping that you love. And so trying to navigate through this from a perspective of learning how to love appropriately and learning how I can still be connected to you even though I can't be with you has probably been my biggest challenge in the pandemic.
May I say to Brother Brown, those of us who are a little older get it in terms of not being able to express love as we have traditionally done so. I'm blessed to live next door to my mother. It is an interesting experience to walk into my mother's house wearing a mask and not being able to touch her. I've seen my mother a lot since March. 6 months, I've not been able to touch my mother. But she gets it, and I get it. I think this season will mark the end of some things that were not working to begin with. I'm excited in my latter years about learning to care for the people of God and having younger colleagues assist me and teach me. The other thing I think this season teaches us is that, sometimes God has a way of forcing us to practice what we say. And so during this season, we really are in challenge to walk by faith and not by sight.